We have about 10 minutes for questions or comments, and I would remind the people on the webcast, you too can ask questions or send in comments. Blaine?
Yes, I wanted if you could address
And identify yourself, please.
Blaine Viatar, National Alliance of Independent Crop Consultants. I wonder if you can identify, or maybe some members of the audience could identify some specific cases where the presence of herbicide-resistant weeds have impacted the farmland values. Thank you.
So was that for me, or you're asking kind of people out in the audience for their own experience? Any show of hands? Do people have one? Yeah, sure. It'd be great.
Steve Pals from Australia. There's no doubt that multi-resistance in weeds reduces farm value, and that farmers will always investigate when buying a farm whether the weeds are multi-resistant, because if they are, that will diminish the income that can be earned, and they will discount the value of the land. And there's a published study by Llewellyn and others which documents that. So at least in Australia, land value is affected by serious herbicide resistance issues. Thank you.
I believe we had a hand over here as well.
Yeah, if you would please.
Clyde Smith, I'm with the, you're not on? Okay. Clyde Smith from Marianna, Florida. We did have, when I worked in Extension there, I work for United Phosphorus, or UPI now. When I worked in Extension there, we did have several farms that, once they had become infested with palmer, lost 30% of their rentable value for a period of 4 or 5 years.
Good.
Michael Barrett, University of Kentucky. George, you're talking about communicating the costs and benefits of short and long-term resistance management to growers. What about the industry? I know industry is looking at this and considering this, but certainly their return on investment is impacted by whether they go long or short term. Is there any policy that we could look at to help them get a longer term investment, say extending patent life and things like that?
That's a really good question. When I first started doing things on resistance, colleagues, other economists said, "Why are you doing this? This isn't going to be an issue." And they said, "Well, because the industry has an incentive for there not to be resistance, so they're not going to let it happen." And they thought I was silly for, getting involved in this. Yeah, doing something like, in theory, extending patent length. I mean, there's always a trade-off. Monopolies are bad. New technology is good. This is why you have patents. You want to encourage a certain amount of innovation, but you don't want to have monopoly power forever. It's a similar thing. That might be in the mix of patent length, or when something gets registered, how long you can have it. That's a possibility. When the patent clock starts, because I think just because something's patented doesn't necessarily mean you can actually start selling it anytime soon. So there might be adjustments there that could be done. Another issue is what's happening with generics. And again, when you talk about industry, it isn't just the main producers here, but there's a lot of people selling generic pesticides, and they're going to have less of an incentive to shepherd the technology over the long term.
Any other questions or comments? So, George, I have a question. If I'm a farmer and I have a decision to make about when I need a payoff from resistance management. Have there been any studies that you know of that for various classes of farmers where that decision is different? Some farmers might say, okay, I want an immediate. Others say, okay, I'm fine with 3 years. I don't know who would wait 11 years, but have there been studies to illustrate that?
Well, I mean, they're working on studies about the time frame of when it will, there's two issues of how long will it take to pay off. And that's going to be it's going to vary by region, it's going to vary by crop. And so there's that variability. And then each farmer is going to be individual about what that information is for them. I think, I know at USDA's Economic Research Service, they're collecting information right now that one could actually look for different farming systems. When would it pay for itself? It's going to be like financial planning. Like how much you want stocks, you want bonds, you want something safe. Farmers are going to make that risk decision about how long it takes once they have that information. But the key first step is to have that information so they can actually make the decision, because different farmers are going to be on different clocks. There's going to be people who I just care about this year, and that's going to be a perennial problem. You're going to have farmers that I just care about this year. Next year will worry itself, and that's always going to be a harder sell. But I think the first thing is to allow people to make informed choices. But even with that, different people are still going to make different choices based on their time preference.
And I'm assuming land ownership versus rental would fall into that as well.
Right. And if you see the city getting closer and closer and you think you're going to sell out, you're going to have a different incentive. Yeah, so different people have different incentives, but it would be good if people kind of knew what the trade-offs were.
Right. Other questions? Okay.
Hi, Robin Shane from the National Research Council. So just sort of a follow-up on that is, if USDA ERS is trying to develop this information, but if one scenario is that it doesn't pay off for 10 years, it's going to be 10 years till we got that information. That seems like a long time to wait till we can provide something. What sort of, is there a surrogate? Is there early forecasting, something from the economic side that...
Well, I think, again, we have there's like biological models. You kind of know how things work, or you think you know how things work, and so they're doing, you can do projections out into the future. They'll have to get revised as you get, better information. And then, with any kind of complex model, especially like a bioeconomic model, a lot of the assumptions matter. And then one of the things you can start to do is what economists call is test for robustness. It's like if you can change certain assumptions and the result doesn't really change, then the model is called robust. And through kind of dynamic modeling, you kind of project this is what's going to happen out into the future. And there's capacity to do that. So we don't have to wait 10 years. It's like, we all know that, like, cigarettes aren't so great for you because we waited, right? That was the plan, right? You let everybody smoke, and then we figured out after the fact what it did. You want to know ahead of time. You do simulation models, and then you try to, get better science and get more people involved in, experiments, get better data so those simulation models are more accurate. But we don't have to wait 10 years.
George, you and I have talked about this a little bit, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. As was shown by even polling this group earlier, it's so much about economics. And we've been talking about the need for this for a long time now. And I think most of the weed management community would say, where's the data? From the standpoint of there's been a lot that's been collected, and there's a crying need for some good, simple economic models that could be used to be able to provide accurate forecasts and provide education on how soon or how long it would be, because the perception and reality sometimes are not the same. But without good solid data and information that's being generated, it's still theoretical in terms of, well, we think it will pay off in X number of years, or we think you can actually make a profit now. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. People are making, business decisions for their households, and they're not going to do it based on what an academic, quote unquote, thinks. I think the economics profession can do a lot more of just getting practical numbers out. I think part of it is, a bias within the profession of, we want the latest, type of model, and we want the latest kind of estimation technique, where some of these things are just, basic, like, partial budgeting models. Again, if you do a study right, it's going to get published. It's going to make a splash. And I've had debates with colleagues where they're aiming for economics journals, and my point is that if we're doing stuff on weed management, we don't want the economists to read it. We want the weed scientists to read it. We want the farmers to understand it. So part of it is with the economics profession just writing for and to each other instead of actually trying to have an impact. And I think sometimes things that are lower tech are, in terms of methods, are going to be higher impact. And again, I think it's probably better to have something in science than, or actually an extension bulletin that people read than having something, in a theoretical journal.
One more quick question.
Yeah, just from a grower perspective, you talk about economics a lot, and we all have different views of that. One of the things I see, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, coming into my operation, someone coming to me as a crop consultant might say, you're going to have possibly this additional cost of a herbicide management plan. Let's work through that. $7.50 corn and $16 beans makes that a lot easier to stomach. Moving into the era we're moving into now, some of the folks that have come into my office and over to my farm as my customers, we are in the process of, okay, where is the comparison on what can I cut on one portion of my farm to add this additional. So you may want to spend some time, developing that data. Am I better off reducing, 10 pounds of nitrogen per acre and adding this plan? Am I better off, you're going to have to find a way to substitute one cost for another now I'm under the cost of production right now. So, no one's going to be wanting to add a major additional cost. It's going to have to be offset somewhere.
Right, and that's, I think, an important thing to look at, is that, it isn't just field by field. You've got to look at, here's the amount of working capital growers have to work with. And if you're going to spend more here, you can't spend more there. So you've got to look at the whole farm operation, and there's that trade-off. I'm going to spend more, because I know, again, from Arizona, like for pest control, people have like a certain amount budgeted for that. And if you're spending more here, you're going to spend less there. And so, that makes it a little bit trickier. I think, again, if you're talking to growers, that it's got to fit into their whole farm calculus, not just per acre. I think the per acre thing's important, but someone's only going to adopt it if it fits into the whole farm plan.
Okay, thank you, George. Our next presentation, and the last presentation prior to lunch, is Community-Based Approaches to Resistance Management. Dr. David Irvin, Professor Emeritus of Environmental Management and Economics, and a Senior Fellow with the Institute for Sustainable Solutions at Portland State University, makes this presentation.